The business of sports is huge, generating billions of dollars in revenue for tens of thousands of companies in every corner of the globe. Sport also creates superstars, people that transcend their sport to become global names, brands themselves. Serena, Michael Jordan, Ronaldo, Tom Brady. What role do sports and sports-related businesses have to do with human rights? A heck of a lot, as it turns out. Sports can raise awareness of human rights concerns and cause them. Sports can be great drivers of change. Sports engage many people in special ways. Many of us are sports fans, barracking for our favourite teams, go Collingwood, or watch the Olympics supporting our fellow countrymen and women. The Soccer World Cup, the Olympics, these mega sporting events are the largest television events in history. And with that attention and those eyeballs on them, they attract big business and big money too. The business of sports is huge, measured in billions of dollars annually. That's what we'll explore in this topic: sports, business, and human rights. Other topics we have covered in this course focus in on the negative impacts of business on human rights. When things go wrong, human rights being ignored, damaged, or abused by companies. Well, there's always two sides to every story, and that is absolutely the case when we consider sports and business and human rights. So let's start with the positive this time. Sports have helped elevate human rights concerns by shining a light and television screen onto injustices, providing a platform to athletes and sports people and businesses to stand up for human rights. Whether it's racial inequalities or the rights of the disabled, sports and sports stars and the businesses that sponsor and support them have helped bring these injustices to the fore. An example: Colin Kaepernick, an American football star, began to take a knee during the national anthem that was played at the start of every football match. He did so to protest racial injustice, and in particular the unfair treatment of Black Americans at the hands of the police and criminal justice system. Kaepernick was criticised, even benched for that, showing disrespect to the national anthem. He lost his job as quarterback, and no other team would hire him. Then his chief sponsor, Nike, no stranger to human rights criticism itself, went all in and launched a major new campaign. Yes, to sell shoes, but also to call for racial equality in sports and in society. And who did they choose to be the face of this campaign? Colin Kaepernick. At the same time, sports and the businesses associated with sports and these mega sporting events themselves are also accused of a range of human rights abuses and of providing a veneer of legitimacy to regimes and governments that don't respect human rights. The Football World Cup, the Soccer World Cup, is to be hosted by Qatar in 2022. There have been a range of credible allegations over many years leading up to this World Cup of human rights abuses, not just in Qatar amongst the populace. Qatar is not a liberal democracy, but in particular around the labourers that are helping build the stadiums that will be used by the World Cup. Unsafe building sites, poor wages and exploitative working conditions. Hundreds have even been killed on the job building these gleaming new stadia that will be showcasing some of the highest paid sports stars in the world during the Soccer World Cup. On a smaller scale, we've seen women barred from sporting stadia because of their gender, athletes banned from competitions because of their race, nationality, or gender. The Olympics movement is an interesting case study as well with regard to sports, business, and human rights. The staging of the Olympics is big business. What do you think should the Olympics movement role be in promoting human rights? Should they have a human rights filter, for example, when selecting host cities? During the Olympics, the International Olympic Committee famously called for a worldwide truce, a pause in war and conflicts. But at the same time, they also assiduously avoid getting involved in politics. During the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, staff and athletes were warned not to make statements or actions about Beijing's human rights record. Why? Well, the Olympics put human rights records of host countries, I guess, in the box of politics. And the Olympics movement suggests that sports and politics don't mix. Is that right? What do you think? Finally, I wanted to share a personal story. Again, on the positive side of the ledger, of the power of sports for change when it comes to human rights. In 2000, my girlfriend and I decided to head up to the Sydney Olympics. We were poor uni students at the time, so we bought the cheapest tickets we could. It was to the softball. We just wanted to be a part of the Olympics, to feel the spirit, walk the same streets as these Olympians and be there. We did, and it was awesome. We were on our way home. We were at Sydney Airport one evening, heading home to Melbourne. The Olympics were still going on, and all the TV screens in the airport terminal were tuned into the Olympics. There was anticipation in the air. It was electric, because this wasn't just another night at the Olympics. This was the night that Cathy Freeman, an Indigenous Australian woman, was going to run for gold in the 400 metres. It's hard to describe now the feeling in the country at the time, but it was special. Nowadays, we may think of reconciliation and black-white, Indigenous-white Australia relations in this country as very much on the improve, with past wrongs acknowledged and apologised for. And we are building a more inclusive Australia, one that celebrates the richness of our Indigenous history. But back in 2000, reconciliation was still awkward. The movement to equality and equal rights was just gathering steam. It was far from mainstream. Yet here, on the world's biggest stage under the brightest lights, Cathy Freeman, a proud Indigenous woman, was racing for gold, for her people, for all of Australia. It was a huge symbolic moment. And don't just take my words for it. Ask your parents, ask your grandparents. Where were they that night that Cathy Freeman ran the 400 metres? What were their recollections of that? Anyways, back to my story. So we're sitting at Sydney Airport, all watching the build-up to the great race on the small TVs dotted throughout the terminal. There were only minutes to go, and we were really bummed, disappointed, because it was likely we'd be boarding our aircraft at the time of the race. Then all of a sudden, delayed, flashed across the departure board. Our flight was delayed. Then we noticed all the flights leaving Sydney Airport were delayed. Every single flight. Turns out the pilots, the passengers, indeed all of Australia was watching Cathy Freeman race for her country and win gold. And do a victory lap with both the Australian and Aboriginal flags draped over her shoulders. It was special. An evening that captivated a nation, that moved a nation, moved us to greater reconciliation and to greater respect and appreciation of the rights and history of our Indigenous peoples.